So real quick, in your passage, when it got typed, the paragraphs aren't real clear. So here's your first paragraph there. This is your second paragraph. And then down line like 39, where it says genius and ordinary is a more obstinate, that is paragraph 3 down there. Okay. All right, so we're going to do this the way that I kind of suggest. Now, again, if you are scoring really high on APMCs, then, do what you do, right? I'm going to go in, and I did this morning, and I haven't seen this passage in a while. I'm not reading the passage. I'm going to go in and just start with the questions, all right? All right, so the first paragraph of the passage serves 2. So I go and I look at the first paragraph. Genius or originality is, for the most part, some strong quality in the mind answering to and bringing out some new and striking quality in nature. All right. So what is that doing?
Given the definition.
It's defining genius or originality, right? Okay. So I have to go through. So 1, distinguish between 2 closely related topics. Okay. Are there 2 closely related topics?
Yes.
Yes. What does it mean to distinguish?
To tell the difference between.
So you're looking at the difference. Okay. So are we looking at the difference? No. So what I would call this is a bit of a distractor. Why? Because remember, your distractors can be half right, half wrong. They could be correct, but not for the passage or the selection that you're looking at, or it can be correct, but just not as correct as something else. All right? All right. B, define. Well, that's what we just figured out, right? An abstract idea. Okay, is genius originality abstract?
Nope.
Yes, it is. Okay. And then for further discussion, well, if it's the first paragraph, we can assume that we're not going to jump into something else, right? Okay, so we're going to put a check by that. Offer a factual theorem about nature. So a factual idea, or categorize, right, about nature. Not really, but I would also call this a distractor because, remember, a distractor a lot of times has the word, or has a word from the passage. So notice that this is a quality in nature, not about nature. Does that make sense? So that would be a distractor, so that's not right. Present a contrast to be evaluated. Right, so these 2, I would say, could probably be grouped together, A and D, because they're both about kind of contrast or difference, right? So why do we group answers? We try to group answers because if you can group answers, one group is right, obviously one group is wrong. So it can either help you to mark out quite a few or not mark out some, right? Okay, so we've already said it's not a contrast, it's not a distinguish, so we're marking out A and D. Cite a common misconception among critics. It's not on topic.
That's what I call the stupid one.
There could be a stupid one, and many times there's not a stupid one, right? So the correct answer is B. Okay, so this one is seen as easy. So again, cite a common misconception. If it had started, most people believe that genius means this. It actually means this. Then that could be a misconception, right? But we go back, and this one's a pretty easy one. Okay, the speaker is critical of Rousseau's. Now I'm going to tell you that this is from an older test, and I would think, I can assume I probably correctly now, that now instead of having us, so now we have to go, okay, where's Rousseau? Okay, here's Rousseau, so I have to start here, and then notice the next author is here, so I'm reading down to there, right? We can assume that in our tests now that it wouldn't just reference somebody in the passage, it would actually give you line numbers to go to a little bit more quickly, right? So I think our test has changed a little bit in that respect. Okay, so now we have to read. Now, because this is where it starts talking about Rousseau, I always read a little before, right? In new and unknown combinations, the impression must act by sympathy and not by rule, but there can be no sympathy where there is no passion, no original interest. The personal interest may in some cases oppress and circumscribe the imaginative faculty, as in the instance of Rousseau. But in general, the strength and consistency of the imagination will be in proportion to the strength and depth of feeling. And it is rarely that a man, even of lofty genius, will be able to do more than carry on his own feelings and character, or some prominent and ruling passion, into fictitious and uncommon situations. Okay. So, we go and we see the speaker is critical of Rousseau's what? Lack of precision. Now, what you have to do is you cannot look in the passage for the word precision. What does precision mean? Accuracy. Okay? Like, to be accurate very often. So, we go back into the passage and look. Is there a reference to that idea? Answer's not here. Answer is in the passage. So, go back to that section. Does it talk about accuracy or consistency? Okay, what is it saying in that passage about consistency?
But in general, the strength and consistency of the imagination will be in proportion to the strength and depth of feeling.
Okay, it's not a lack. It does talk about precision, but it's not a lack because it's talking about that it is equal to, right? Okay, so that's not right. Excessive subjectivity. So we have to look. What is subjectivity?
Your bias.
Yeah, your bias. So it's one of the things that they say is hard with English is that it's such a subjective like discipline, right? Like math, science, you have definite answers, right? And history too. English is a little bit more like if I understand it and can feel it, right? So it's subjective. Okay, so go back into the passage. Does he talk about Rousseau's bias?
It does mention like personal interest, which could lead to bias, but I don't know if it's directly talking about.
Okay,
It's
so
rare that a man of even lofty genius will be able to more than carry on his own feelings and character. No.
So, but what are feelings and character?
Oh,
Bias.
Yeah, you're biased.
It's your subjectivity, right? And then he says that they can more than carry of his own feelings and character or some prominent and ruling passion into fictitious and uncommon situations. So basically, you, like all of your opinions and ideas go through into your writing. There's no way that you could separate yourself from that. So, yes, we think. Is there an idea of sympathy in there? Is he critical of his sympathy?
No.
Is sympathy discussed in there?
In the first part. Well, not in the sentence in new and unknown combinations. They say the word. But
Yeah. Yep. They say the word before we get into Rousseau, right? That's leading into Rousseau. So again, I would say that that is a distractor. What does it mean to be ambitious?
Hopeful.
Dream big.
Dream big. Like you want to move up. You want to continue to go. Does it talk about Rousseau's desire to move up in the world?
No.
Not really. What does aloofness mean? Not care less about what? Yeah, you're kind of distant. Sometimes you think you're a little better than. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to group these together for one silly reason. They're kind of related, and they're both one word. The other ones have descriptors of. So we already marked out ambitious, and I would mark out aloofness because they're both one word. It sometimes is not that simple, but I'm going to say I would mark that out. So your correct answer is this one. I'm going to say is medium, and I'm going to tell you why. If this were one that even if it had a line number, that I was running out of time and I had 5 minutes, this is not one that I would answer. Because this is one that I call a time suck. You are having to go back in multiple times, back and forth and decide, right? So there's a little bit more depth in this one. So this one I would say is medium because of the question and the inferring that you have to do, and because of the amount of time that it takes for you to slip away.
So like on our mock we had a question like that. We had like there was like different answers, like line 40 something, and like I was like, I don't want to do this, like
because you were back and forth too much. I would skip it. Don't move to the next page until you're done, but I would leave that one for the last, and if you have enough time before you move on to your next, like if you're keeping time, like I told you, 12 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on, how many passages you have. If you have enough time, sometimes those are a little bit easier, they're just time sucks. So that would be one that I would, before I moved on, I would look at my time and see how far I had in that passage, and I would leave that one for the end. The speaker characterizes Paradise Lost as a literary work that. So now we go, here's Paradise Lost. It starts with Milton. Notice our next one is Shakespeare, so I'm going to read from Milton down to Shakespeare. Right? Milton has, by allusion, embodied a great part of his political and personal history in the chief characters and incidents of Paradise Lost. He has, no doubt, wonderfully adapted and heightened them, but the elements are the same. You trace the bias and opinions of the man in the creations of the poet. All right, so the speaker characterizes Paradise Lost as a literary work. So characterizes is your key term. Reflects the conflict between thought and feeling in its author. I think part of that is right and part of that is wrong.
I mean, reflecting like his thoughts.
Yeah, thoughts and feelings I think are correct, right? Because if I go back and I look at the idea of his bias and opinions, right, are the same, I'm like, okay, those are thoughts and feelings, right? But I think this is what makes it wrong. And sometimes answer choices are that specific that this one answer makes it wrong. Offers an appropriate example of a work of a genius.
No.
I think this is a distractor because I think all of the authors that he's talking about, he's saying are geniuses. So I think that is correct, but it does not characterize Paradise Lost. Does that make sense? Draws a clear distinction between ordinary people and poets.
Nope.
Do we talk about ordinary people in there? No. Poets is in there. It's like the last word of that line, right? But it's not the difference between ordinary people and poets. Reveals the views of its creator.
Yeah.
Why?
It's the bias. They're saying that
Yeah,
it's
you
like
trace the
natural.
bias and opinions of the man in the creation of their work. Okay? Captures the political climate of the age.
Nope. Not of the age, but of the poet.
Right, but if you look, Milton has by allusion embodied a great part of his political and personal history. So again, I would say that that is
Distracted.
a distractor just because the language is in there. So your correct answer is, that one is also labeled easy. That one I don't think would take as much time, because I think when you read that selection of those couple of lines, you're going to see very quickly when you go through the answers that C or that D is the correct answer. But notice, what are you seeing that I'm doing that you may not be doing? Annotating and going through each question. Right? Now, right now it's taking us a little bit of time to do this. It does not take as long for you to do it when you're doing it, like especially when you have the clock running and you're pushing, right? But I want you to see kind of how we work through those questions. All right? So what I'm going to give you is